Great, thanks, Keiara. So I am very pleased to welcome three very distinguished panelists and three close friends, Dr. Dawn Wright, Billy Williams, and Dr. Brandon Jones. And many of us at Scripps know Dawn from the multitude of our programs that she intersects with. She is the chief scientist of the Environmental Systems Research Institute, known to most of us as Esri. It is a world-leading geographic information systems, software, and data science company. Dawn is also a professor of geography and oceanography at Oregon State. And we see her at the Oceanciences meeting, we see her at the AGU, we see her at many of our workshops and webinars because GIS software and data science opportunities are so connected with us. She is a fellow of the AAAS, the Oceanography Society, the Geological Society of America, and much more. And she is very active on really important advisory committees, including the advisory committees for NOAA and EPA. She's on the National Academy of Sciences Ocean Studies Board, the Ocean Discovery X Prize, and we are very thankful that she's also a member of the Scripps Oceanography Directors Council. Billy Williams is the Senior Vice President for Ethics, Diversity, and Inclusion at the American Geophysical Union. And it was just a delight to work with Billy on so many projects while I was on the board and an officer of AGU. And he really led AGU and prodded us to take on activities that have really led to AGU being a leader in the whole field of geosciences on expanding diversity, equity, and inclusion in geoscience. Billy was the principal investigator and lead organizer for the September 2016 National Science Foundation funded workshop, Sexual Harassment in the Sciences, A Call to Respond. He's also been involved in other AGU grants, an NSF grant under the Advanced Program Advanced Partnership from Classroom to the Field, improving the workplace in the geosciences. And he serves as the principal investigator on catalyzing cultural change in the sciences with new resources and tracking tools and more. And he has just been an absolutely critical person for AGU's ability to work in this area. And Dr. Brandon Jones is the Program Director for Education and Broadening Participation Efforts in NSF's Directorate for Geosciences. So he oversees the programs that focus on graduate and undergraduate workforce preparation. He supports initiatives related to increasing diversity and enhancing inclusion in geosciences. And he also is a recent board member of the American Geophysical Union and a current board member for the Environmental Leadership Program. So I want to thank all of you for joining, and I'm really looking forward to your discussion. Thanks.
So we're going to start with Dawn.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. It is such a pleasure for me to be with you today. And I'm going to spend a few minutes just telling a little bit of my story. And I think that Billy and Brandon have a similar plan, because it's in telling our stories that a lot of the really good questions and discussion can come out. I don't think we have to go much further than that, because our stories, our day-to-day lives are actually now becoming fodder for very important discussion about how we need to change the academy writ large and how we need to change ocean sciences and geoscience. And I'd like to start off by thanking Scripps and the AGU and the NSF, because I would not have a career were it not for those three fantastic institutions. So I will start off and share my screen. And on my end, I'm seeing that everything is sharing properly, so I'm going to go ahead. And if something goes wrong, just let me know. So my beginning, and this is me 6 months in. I think it's always fun to look back at where we started. And this is the earliest that I can remember starting out. And I wondered many things, and I wondered whether oceanography was going to be in my future, or maybe GIS, or maybe going into space. Who knew what was going on in that little head there? But things started to come into greater focus during my childhood in Maui, on Maui. So this is a picture of me training for the 1980 Olympics. On the island of Maui and in Hawaii, we ran track without shoes. And that was actually a cautionary tale right there, because we didn't realize how much faster we could run with shoes. And it later became apparent that we needed this extra bit of help, this extra bit of technology to help us reach our dreams. And I mention this because I tease my colleagues in the GIS world when they are stuck in a certain revision or a certain version of technology, and they're not willing to move forward and to go with the latest innovations. And it's almost like running track in your bare feet instead of using spikes. But if we move forward, this is a picture of me as a graduate student entering UCSB's doctoral program. And so there was a lot of adventures that occurred between the childhood and entering UCSB as a doctoral student. But for me, this was consequential because it actually laid the foundation for my collaborations with Scripps. I actually had the opportunity to go to sea on Scripps research vessels and to have really close connections with colleagues who were either educated at Scripps or who are affiliated with Scripps now. And so you just never know, even from, and this is our incoming class, you have no idea what is before you as you enter a phase and as you enter a certain chapter of your life. For those of you who are graduate students now, postdocs, I am very, very excited for you, despite the challenges that are before us. I envy you in a way, and I am sure that you are going to have marvelous careers, and it's deep connections and other programs like this that were not available to us as graduate students, but that are available to you as students and as young faculty that will help you navigate the waters. So I'm very, very happy for you. There are many, many, many stories that we can tell about how we got to a certain point. And one of the mottos from my experience is failure. We all have failings in our background. I'm going to tell one story very quickly about a failing that almost took me out of oceanography completely. I was having a very rough time with my master's thesis research at Texas A&M. I was doing a marine graphimetry and seafloor tectonic study of some Western Pacific data that I had, and I was having a hard time with the mathematics and also with understanding some of the geophysical concepts, the geodynamics. It was all new to me. And I had a major professor at the time who was very busy. He had just entered academia himself, having just finished his postdoc. So I was his very first graduate student. And he basically was not able to give me much guidance at all. I basically had to teach myself what I needed to know in order to finish my thesis research. And I depended on graduate students in another department also to help me. And so I got everything to the point where I defended my thesis, made it through that, and then was told by him on behalf of the committee that I had just barely passed and that I was not showing the promise that they had hoped for, and that I should give up the field of oceanography. They were going to give me the master's degree, but he said, take the master's degree and go to law school or go get an MBA because you have no future in oceanography. So I thought, well, that's interesting. I had worked very hard and had taught myself what I needed to know. I was not ready to give up that easily. And so what happened to me next is that I was able to get a job as a marine technician on the JOIDES resolution and become part of what was then the ocean drilling program, which is now the integrated ocean discovery program, and went on to go to sea in many, many places as an ODP marine tech. That led me to entering the PhD program at Santa Barbara and actually having advisors who were fantastic, guiding me to a joint degree in both geography, which is where the GIS came in. At that time, GIS was very new, and oceanography. So the moral of that story is failure is not final. Do not ever give up and seek those who are able to give you the support that you need or that you don't even realize that you need. And a few equator crossings at sea don't hurt either. So I have that certification as well. And my time at Santa Barbara was transformative, not only because of the mentorship and the camaraderie with great colleagues such as Steve Miller, who I think is in the audience, who was a fantastic mentor for me as well, but also for opportunities such as being able to dive in Alvin. I had a co-advisor, Rachel Heyman, who was willing to give up Alvin seats to students. That has become a bit more commonplace now, but back in the early 90s, that just was not done. You had to be a lead PI in order to have that privilege. And she bucked that system and made it possible for so many of us to get that transformative, definitive experience. And so that was fantastic. I went on to do some diving with the Pisces submersible as well under the Hawaii Undersea Research Lab, which is unfortunately defunct right now, but we have hopes that it will return. And I'll just shorten the story by saying a bit more about Esri, because after the PhD at Oregon State, there were 17 wonderful years at Oregon State University as a professor of geography and oceanography. So for many of you, you know COAS, the College of Oceanic and Atmospheric Sciences. It's now CEOS, the College of Earth, Ocean and Atmospheric Sciences. So I was a faculty closely affiliated with that unit and doing all kinds of research. Was lured away from academia to industry, to Esri, as Margaret has explained, and now cover a broad portfolio of sciences, but still focused on mapping. And this is our Ocean Base Map project, which is coming up on its 10-year anniversary, with a base map that was designed with the legacy of Marie Tharp in mind. That's a whole other story in and of itself. And a portfolio of projects in the ocean science domain, as well as terrestrial solid earth science, open science and open source, social science, and what we call geographic information science, and of course, climate change, weather and climate science. So that's a bit of an introduction. I forgot to put my timer on, so I hope I didn't take up too much time. But there are many other things that we can talk about that we will talk about. But if you'd like a little bit more about the story, you can copy down or take a screenshot of this picture with this blog post, and then also my contact information as well. So I will stop there, and thank you very much again for inviting me to this important conversation.
Thank you so much, Dawn. That was enlightening. You've done so much, and as everyone is saying, we're so glad that you stuck with it and were able to persevere through that journey. Thanks so much. Folks, if you have questions for Dawn that you would like to have her answer today, go ahead and start putting those in the chat. And now we're going to turn it to Billy Williams.
Okay, thank you so much, Keiara, for inviting me, and Margaret for the nice introduction. And Dawn, it's tough to follow you. and those cute baby pictures as well. So I'm not showing any baby pictures today. But it is a pleasure to be here with you and to participate in this inaugural setting for the Deep Connections series. So I'm just going to talk with you a bit about what we're doing at AGU, so scientific societies. But before I get to that, a little bit more about me and who is AGU. It sounds like I did not know whether this audience was going to be primarily geoscientists. Sounds like it is. So I don't have to tell you a lot about AGU. But here's just some things that I captured and then a little bit about myself. You probably all know we have 25 disciplinary sections within AGU, about 60,000 members. Our membership composition now is about 29% women's scientists, 23% students, and 41% from outside the US. If you look at our publications in AGU now, over 50% of our first authors are from outside the US. So we're really growing as an international organization, and that has implications for how we approach and what we talk about when we describe our efforts for diversity, equity, inclusion. You're familiar with the meetings, honors and awards. We have a lot of work to do in those areas. But from an AGU staff standpoint, so I work for AGU. We have 130 full-time staff members at AGU headquarters. And those of you who don't keep up with our day-to-day goings, we do have a new CEO who just joined us in August of this year. Randy Pfizer replaced Chris McEntee. So we continue to be in very, very good hands with Randy as our new CEO. So as Margaret said, I actually serve as our senior staff leader for ethics, diversity, and inclusion. I'm not an HR person. I don't deal with compliance-related issues. I typically don't get involved with AGU staff-related issues, but more recently we have. By training, my background, I'm actually a synthetic organic chemist by training, believe it or not. And when I joined AGU, I actually joined AGU as Director of Science. So I had viewed myself for my full career up until the last 3 years as being, I'm a scientist. I'm not an HR person, not a D&I person. I'm a scientist. So it's an interesting story that when I was asked, because we had started some things in AGU to be more aggressive in advancing D&I issues, I was asked to take this on as opposed to being the Director of Science. And to be honest, at that time, I did not know whether I was being rewarded or punished, because I was being told, you're doing such a great job at getting traction on these things, Billy, you're the right person for this, please do this. And it was not my identity at the time. But as I talked to my grown kids about legacy and the impacts we were having, I started to lean into this. I was still learning, I still am learning, and that has led us to where we are today. So I'm happy that I was given the opportunity to lean into this. So our history in AGU in what many folks now call JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion. I think Brandon Jones may have been the person who coined that for us as a common terminology. We have an extensive history. I have two things circled here. So we cut our teeth in AGU on looking and addressing harassment-related issues, and this was before the Me Too movement. So back in 2015, there was a town hall meeting. Margaret Leinen was AGU president at the time when there was a big case that became well known out of UC Berkeley. It wasn't an AGU case, but it was close to home. And we started to address this issue. And based on that, and under Margaret's leadership, as AGU president, we started to lean into these issues of not just responding to issues of harassment, but more being a leader on addressing them. So we saw a role for ourselves in AGU as having to address issues that were so important to our membership, and especially our women scientists. And then 2 years later, as a natural extension of that work, we adopted this major change to AGU ethics policy, where we now list or promote, not promote, but we treat harassment, discrimination, and bullying as scientific misconduct within our AGU policy. The other thing that we're proud of within AGU is that we have this strong multi-layered policy foundation. So when things come up, we don't have to struggle or search for what are we going to do, how we're going to handle this. The ethics policy that I just mentioned from 2017, we adopted a diversity and inclusion strategic plan in 2018 under leadership of a D&I task force, and Keiara was a member of that task force. And just recently, this year, AGU has adopted a new strategic plan, an updated strategic plan, where we have 3 major goals, but one of those goals is inclusive science. So DE&I is embedded heavily into our AGU strategic plan. This past year, as you all know, has been a challenging year because on top, and especially in the DEI world, in addition to all the other issues that we were dealing with, and then that's COVID, the global pandemic, and then at the George Floyd incident in May of 2020, that just brought a whole new effort to us looking in the mirror at ourselves in this nation as to what are we doing and what are we going to do and who are we. So with that, I'm going to pivot now and tell you a little bit more about what we're doing in AGU on addressing systemic racism in STEM, some recent progress. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these slides. I can make these available or we can have follow-up discussion. But 3 areas of actions for anyone who's interested in what they can do. You can address things on a personal level, so look at your own personal education and awareness, unconscious bias, who do you include in your comfort zone? Do you use your privilege for good? Are you mentoring, for example? So personally, there are things we can do. Then there are institutional barriers, and I think any institution should be looking at those barriers in addition to encouraging individuals to address increasing their personal awareness. Examining your policies and practices, looking at your spending governance habits. What are your demographics in your governance of your organization? Assure equitable access to resources. And then finally, there's a broader cultural dimensions in our society, especially in the United States. What are the norms and behaviors? Do we challenge stereotypes, let them go? Do we practice intervention? So all of these 3 areas are 3 prongs of places where we can all take action. AGU this past summer, in response to the George Floyd incident, in response to the Geosciences of Color call for action, issued these 8 action areas to combat systemic racism in STEM. I'm not going to go through all of these, but we can follow up on any of these. But 1 was looking at our funding for our DE&I efforts. 2 was looking at diversifying our governance, what type slates, who we're selecting to be candidates for office in AGU, recognizing reward, who do we give honor, how do we honor, who do we honor? So what do we recognize in AGU? That's still a very active area for us. This next one is diverse meetings. Some of you participated in our 2020 AGU fall meeting. It lasted 3 weeks. That was a toughie, but it was so good. We had over 25,000 people participating over that 3-week period. I think it was the most diverse and inclusive meeting we've had within AGU. Looking at publications, support the success of emerging underrepresented scientists, advocate for policies. As an organization, we can advocate for policies that eliminate racial injustice. And then we have an obligation in AGU to partner more broadly than we have in the past. So we're pursuing all of these items. Just a brief snapshot for any of you who were at AGU 2020 meeting. You've seen some of these things, but I think we had a program that was very powerful. Dr. Jones was on a few of these panels here, on several of these panels. But it was I thought it was a very powerful undertaking. And we also had policies in place that made it a more inclusive meeting as well. Other thing I want to highlight in terms of AGU moving forward is the fact that we have an AGU D&I Advisory Committee. And I'm highlighting this here. The committee is chaired by Dr. Lisa White up at Berkeley, and many of you may know her, but also as committee members, your own Keiara is part of that committee, and my fellow panelists here, Dawn Wright is a member of that committee. This has been a real privilege to work with this group of very smart and proactive advocates across all areas of DE&I. We have also had in AGU, when I said I didn't deal with staff issues, we have since this past May, starting in June, we have established monthly AGU all staff discussions on race and racism. And the purpose for this is, since AGU as an organization is moving forward in this area, our staff members need to feel comfortable in this area as well. So we've led these discussions, and this is highlighted here because the book we have used most often in leading staff discussions is this book, What If I Say the Wrong Things? 25 Habits for Culturally Effective People. It's a nice handbook. So if you're looking to have discussions within your organization, I would highly recommend you consider that book. It's like $10 on Amazon. Here's another example of partnerships. We're working across multiple societies now to sponsor workshops addressing issues of race or diversity in faculty hiring, for example. We just had our third in a series of workshops this last week. There's a broad group of organizing members on this. So there's a workshop series underway. These are recorded. And so if you reach back out, you can actually, if you're looking for items related to faculty hiring or retention or promotion or whatever, there's some good information. This was the third in that workshop series. The second one was around faculty. So we can provide that to you as well. Here's a listing of some other activities we're involved in, the Advanced Geo, the Sloan Grant, where we have workshops that are available across STEM. Societies Consortium, we help co-sponsor that. Now we have over 130 organizations pulling together to address harassment and anti-racism policies. Sea Change is another program, so we can provide more information on that. And then we have an Ethics and Equity Center. And one of the programs of the D&I committee is to establish an AGU diversity inclusion dashboard to help track progress, which would include not only quantitative measures, but also some qualitative measures on how we're doing. I want to spend my last few minutes on a new initiative. It's called Agu Academy. This is an NSF funded initiative, and it is intended to establish a community of practice for D&I. So some of you may be interested in that. That's part one. Part two is that we will have an Agu Academy where we'll bring cohorts of leaders through. This is just now underway. Community of practice we plan to have this launched by the end of first quarter. In the academy, where we bring cohorts of individuals who apply and are selected, and we have to tell you what selection criteria will be. It's not yet established. 2-year cohorts coming through with lots of intense interactions, some peer mentoring opportunities, but the cohorts will also have a project that they execute over this 2-year period. So those items are the key components of landing. We think it'll be high impact. We see it being sustainable into the future. My closing message is this. I'm a huge advocate for AGU, but also professional societies as a whole. Professional societies really do have the potential to be powerful drivers of change in the DE&I space. So I hope if you're not already active in your professional society, please do so.
Thank you so much, Billy, for all of that. It's great to hear all of the different ways that AGU has the history of how AGU has been engaged with these issues, and then how you continue to push forward with things like the AGU landing and the academy. So thank you for sharing that. And hopefully we'll be sharing resources afterwards. So the link that Dawn mentioned, where you could read more about her bio, as well as the information about the programs Billy mentioned, we'll be sharing with folks after the recording. And so now we're going to turn it over to Brandon Jones.
Thank you, Keiara. Oh, things are switched here. Hold on for a second. I'm sorry. Get my screens together here. Okay. Keiara, can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you for the introduction, and not to be outdone by Dawn, I did want to. Well, actually, we hadn't talked, so we must have been on the same wavelength. But I did want to include a picture of one of my Alvin cruises. I was fortunate enough to be involved in two, even though my dissertation research was on shallow water species way on the East Coast. But I like to show this picture as part of this message of inclusive science, et cetera. And I think I'll be coming at my few minutes from the context of the title there, science doesn't conduct itself. So who gets to conduct science, and why all of a sudden we are having these ramped up, fast forwarded conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion, et cetera. So why all the DEI discussions? Because it's been proven, and there's data. It doesn't matter if it's gender, race, ethnicity, et cetera, ability, sexual orientation, what have you. Many individuals in the scientific enterprise have not been able to bring 100% of themselves to the research enterprise. And so obviously this has hindered many them as individuals, but more so as far as science is concerned, it's impacting the science. And I think Margaret mentioned how diversity helps drive innovation in all sectors in her introductory comments. And this certainly is the case in science, and there's plenty of scholarship out there that describes this. And so we have all of these efforts, and to Billy's, I have to respond to Billy. I did not coin Jedi, but I did coin Be Jedi, I think, because we want to emphasize the necessity of that sense of belonging in a supportive environment, no matter where you are. And the way to get to an environment that provides an individual a sense of belonging is through these Jedi activities and efforts. So justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. I think everyone over the past 7 to 8 months since the murder of George Floyd in last May have been aware of at least the meanings of the acronym and what these words actually mean when they're put into practice. Well, we have to understand the history of the country, the United States, and maybe others, but in particular in the United States, and the mindset that has crept into many sectors, including the sciences, as it relates to who gets to be involved in the scientific enterprise. And in this instance, I have in the geoscience research enterprise. So on the left, you probably recognize that flyer from the wonderful musical Hamilton. Many of you have probably seen it. In that, if you have seen it, in that musical, there is a number or a song in which there's a line that says, "Immigrants, we get the job done." And that's the mindset of the United States, correct? It's if you're an immigrant and you come over and you work hard and you take advantage of the system that's set in place, and you have grit and determination, and you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and you're going to be successful, you can make something out of yourselves. And we can argue about that at the next in-person AGU, hopefully this year in New Orleans. But really, almost a third, about 31 to 33% of the US population are descendants of individuals who were not immigrants. The Native and indigenous communities were already here. The Mexican community that was already here, and those of from African origin, from particular countries from West Africa, were kidnapped and brought here. So that notion of the immigrant coming and taking advantage of the system and working hard and such doesn't fit for almost a third of the population here in the US. And it has seeped into all sectors, including science. And so if that's the attitude that moves into how we develop programs or how we hire or how we recruit or our expectations of success, then we're going to continually see issues with those same groups. And that's the fact that we do see in this paper, a seminal paper that came out in 2018 by Rachel Bernard and Emily Cooperdock, that after 40 years of upfront efforts in recruiting and teacher preparation and mentoring and all of these things on the front end of the pathway system for individuals from historically underrepresented groups, there's still, at least in this figure that shows number of PhDs in geosciences, that's still flat for many of those groups, we'll say, of color. Okay, so we have to kind of look at and step back and say, you know, what is going on here? And some of that might be that mindset of the immigrant coming in and taking advantage, but there has to be a lot of energy placed in the system to keep almost a third of the group where they are over this amount of time. And so it's uncomfortable to talk about, but it has to be discussed. So there are assumptions about who gets to conduct science, and then there are discussion or considerations about where science is conducted, in particular in the geosciences. And if we're serious about this work and we continue to have these conversations, we run into more ugly truths, like the ethnic cleansing and creation of the national park system, which was John Muir's idea of putting forward the concept of an uninhabited wilderness, which at the time President Teddy Roosevelt embraced. So you had the politics and a wrong assumption about people and land, and you see what happens from that. And here, so we have in modern day geoscience programs, say geology, for instance, or other field sciences, where we have public lands and native and indigenous lands where a lot of research is conducted without the thought of the impact of the land and the people that are there and the history of that land. And it's a perpetuation of a very extractive, capitalistic kind of science where you go in disregarding or have no regard for the land and the people, things I mentioned. You extract what you need, whether it be samples, whether it be data, or and you go back to where you come from. So it's very, very much perpetuating the colonistic mindset of the early Americas, where you just go in, do what you want, and leave. And we have to make sure when we're talking about these issues related to diversity, equity, inclusion, sense of belonging, justice, et cetera, that we recognize the history so that we don't repeat ourselves there. If we have these assumptions about who gets to conduct science, we have an assumption about maybe where the science is conducted or even how. These assumptions, coupled with the concepts of creating, as I mentioned before, programs or hiring practices or recruitment efforts, you can find yourself in some scary situations. So many of us, if we have REUs, if we're, for instance, Scripps in the hiring of new faculty or the appointment of postdocs in certain areas, we package the opportunity in such a wonderful way. Many times from our perspective, we've had a great experience. And so we offer we market, I should say, this experience of it's going to be wonderful if you come here, if you come to this department, if you just come to this internship, if you just work in this lab or on this team, it's going to be wonderful. But there are so many stories like the one Dawn shared, where the individuals did not have the experience that was advertised to them. And there was a retention issue for the most part, not for the most part, but there has been quite a bit of an issue related to retention for many of these groups and others, because it was more about the environment than it was whether or not the individuals were capable of succeeding. So if it was one or two individuals over the course of that 40 years from that graph from the Bernard and Cooperdock paper, then we could say, well, maybe those individuals, and here are the terms that we use, maybe they didn't have what it took. Maybe they weren't the right fit. Maybe they just didn't kind of meet the qualifications. We could certainly say that, but after 40 years, if the fish continually are dying, then we can't keep blaming the fish. We got to look at the water. There's something going on with our environments, our departments, our programs, our institutions, the sectors that needs to be adjusted so that individuals can bring, as I mentioned before, all of themselves to the enterprise. What NSF recognized and is doing as it relates to this is bringing in the social scientists to work with the geoscientists, because we recognize that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a human issue. It's not a science issue. It's not an economics issue. It's a human issue. And so we need the experts that know about humans to come and help us with these issues. And the Golden Program is the latest in the Geosciences Directorate as it relates to cultivating diversity champions. So this is not student focused. This is professional focused and providing the professional development for individuals like deans and chairs and faculty, et cetera, to learn how to create environments that allow individuals to thrive. So I'll speed up here with a few considerations and I'll be finished. Number one, asset language versus deficit language. For instance, nowadays, minority is a passé term. It just the root word itself puts the onus of less than on a group or that individual versus what that individual can bring. They are a scholar, they are a scientist, they are a geologist, whatever it is. And I was glad to hear Margaret use the term underrepresented scholar in her introductory remarks. Critical self-reflection by white colleagues and administrators. There's a lot of scholarship on how to be intentional about mentoring and understanding cultural awareness and those elements for other groups, but it takes some work. The scholarship is there, but it does require some effort. Recognition that bias and all of these assumptions impact hiring, awards, appointments, tenure, and promotion. Billy talked about the award systems at AGU and what AGU is looking to do to address that. But we have to recognize that all along the pathway for individuals' careers, bias can interrupt their progression. Two more. Recognition of the multiple ways of knowing. So tribal ecological knowledge, Pan-African understanding of the environment is at par with Western science. It's just different. And we certainly need to recognize if we are embracing certain groups coming in, they are bringing these ways of knowing with them, and we should embrace those ways of knowing. The last thing is it takes intentionality, especially for big institutions who've done things a certain way for a certain time, like Scripps, but they can learn, R1s can learn from minority serving institutions, even though I said minorities passé, this report came out 2 years ago. You can learn about the intentionality it takes to educate and train in holistic manners for the up and coming generations of scientists. So with that, I will stop there and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Brandon. That was enlightening. I really appreciate the comments around the involuntarily incorporated. It's just a reminder of our history that affects our current situation, and then also sharing the Gold program. And then I really like the layout of the who and where science is conducted, and the need for intentionality around how we think about that. We have time for a couple of questions, and so there's one directed to Dawn, and the question is, thank you so much for sharing your story. It meant a lot to me. Have you spoken with your master's advisor since starting the PhD program, perhaps coincidentally at a conference? If so, what was that interaction like? And if not, do you have a message you would want to share with him?
That is a great question. Thank you, Danielle. Interestingly enough, it was at an AGU fall meeting that I had a chance to meet to see my old advisor. He came to my poster. And by then I had finished my postdoc, and I was well on my way in a tenure track post at Oregon State. And he was apologetic. He said that it was clear that their assessment had been incorrect, and he apologized and he wished me well. So it was very brief, but that was, to me, that was very significant. Now today we would be a little harsher with that, because there was no critical self-reflection there, although I have no idea of knowing what was going on with him. He had gone on to do very, very well at his institution. And so you don't know all of the ins and outs, but I do appreciate the fact that he reached out in that way.
Thank you, Dawn. The next question is, we're hearing a lot about the disproportionate impact of COVID on underrepresented minorities in the science community. Following on Billy's great presentation, can the panelists identify any specific actions that the scientific societies in particular could undertake to support those most impacted by the pandemic? So I'll open it up to the panelists. Billy?
I'll start. I think one of the things the scientific societies can do is shine a light on those disparities, either sponsor studies or gather data and help share those data with institutions where impacts are being felt. For example, I know in our pubs area, we are looking at disparate impacts of COVID as it relates to gender. So what's it doing to those who publish, for example? And we know that in today's US society, at least, a lot of the care for children, if you have children at home, still falls on the female of the household. And so there's some disparities there as well. So I think what we can do is provide data, provide rallying points, or host meetings or host some convenings around these topics to gather enough information that we can take forward.
Thank you, Billy. Anyone else want to comment on that one?
I will say from the NSF perspective, foundation-wide and even within the directorates at NSF, we, of course, there was rapid funding that came in last fiscal year, and there's some signals that there's going to be some coming in again from Congress for COVID relief, for impacted projects, for institutions, for students whose internships were interrupted, and students whose research was interrupted, and early career, everything related to that. So the foundation is tracking the projects that have been supported by that funding, and also the impact of through the reporting procedures of those projects as it relates to COVID. So at the personal or individual level, as Billy mentioned, but also at the project level, and even maybe at the department or that unit level, so we can kind of see what is going on with the pandemic and how it's impacting the scientific enterprise.
Awesome.
And I'll just quickly say, as a member of professional societies, and Billy's point about how impactful these societies are and will be, fantastic point. And I just find that professional societies provide some of the safe spaces that are needed to share resources and to share with each other what the professional societies offer, what NSF offers, even what our institutions offer, but the specialty groups or focus groups or the smaller groups within these professional societies can really be very helpful in that respect too.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, panelists, for that question. Our next question is for Dr. Jones. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It's always a pleasure to hear you speak. I'm wondering if there are reporting or accountability mechanisms for lead PIs that have received significant grant funding from NSF for educational or BJEDI programs under DUE-DO, for example, whose personal behaviors, actions don't reflect or are even in direct conflict with the goals of their grant and broader BJEDI efforts of NSF. That's a loaded question there, Brandon.
That is a loaded one, and I think it's going to be the time that my technology goes out. But no, I mean, that's an awesome question, and I will candidly say that NSF is just starting to really grapple with some of the broadening participation programs that it's supported throughout the directorates over the years, and taking those best practices and pointing them inward. So not just inward to the program directors, program officers, but also, as the question says, monitoring through the reporting process and through the monitoring of the project progress of how the PIs are behaving. So to the point of not just allowing the lip service to continue and the money to continue to flow to individuals who are providing lip service, but what is the actual outcome and what's the product that's coming out of this? And with more diverse panels, and those out there that are faculty, if you've never served on an NSF panel, please reach out to POs, sign up in the system. We need those diverse perspectives because the panels have power when they're reviewing these proposals, and the panelists can call those things out. When the community polices the community, it's much better than when NSF or someone else does it. So I hope that helped.
Thanks, Brandon. So we have time for about one more question, and the last three questions are kind of connected. So asking, are there lessons for addressing diversity in your students that might be implemented across STEM? And then also asking, how can individual departments improve retention or recruitment efforts for underrepresented students? And then the last is kind of the lines, what can white scientists, how can they use their privilege to be more effective to their BIPOC colleagues? So they're all kind of like, what can we do or should we be doing to address diversity, particularly among students?
I can start just by mentioning that mentorship and sponsorship, it could be huge for individuals. I know my personal journey was heavily influenced by someone who thought I had great potential and wanted me to become a scientist, a chemist. So you can, I think, being in a mentorship relationship and reaching out and looking across who's in your community and making sure you're not just mentoring someone who might look just like you.
Thanks, Billy. Dawn or Brandon? Final thoughts?
I'm still thinking about Freeman Habrowski's plenary at the AGU fall meeting. And if that is, Billy, maybe that's on YouTube by now, but I would recommend everyone to watch that because he gives some very specific advice and answers to these questions. And the one that stood out to me, especially having come through departments that were, I was the only one, only student, no other faculty, but it worked for me because the faculty and the students who were there, they were authentic. They showed that they cared, with the exception of my master example, but that was an outlier. They cared about me and my future, and they really wanted me to be there and to join them in this work. And so even for the small departments who are trying to attract students, that authenticity can go a very long way.
Thank you, Dawn. Brandon?
I'll quickly jump in. This is a great question. You really have to take a look at what is the unique issue to your department or your unit, because they're not all the same. There's no one size fits all, no magic bullet. There's specific work because one department may have an issue with gender and another may have an issue with something else. So you need to make sure you identify that. But broadly speaking, and NSF has supported a couple of projects recently in this area, the Academy can look at how DEI work is counted as scholarship for those individuals who are involved in that work, for tenure and promotion. Also look at workload, as Billy was hinting at. What are the workload policies at the institution as it relates to certain individuals, say for instance in COVID with family care, or even those that are doing DEI work, which it disproportionately falls on faculty of color or women. So institutional policies are a place to take a look.
Mm-hmm.
So we are at time, and I do want to just thank our panelists so much for the very insightful, thought-provoking comments, and really appreciate your time in helping the Scripps community to move forward with this discussion. We will be sending out resources, and I want to do just one quick plug. We have another one of these Deep Connections scheduled for next week. We will have Aradhana Tripathi from UCLA, Vernon Morris from ASU, and Hindrada Ali from Fort Hays. And so hopefully you will all come back and join us for that discussion as well. So thank you to everyone for taking the time today, and be well. And we will be sharing the recording and other details after. Take care. Bye now.
Thank you.